So perhaps I could just introduce myself really quick, and then we'll go down and introduce everyone on the panel. So my name is Pete Cashmore. I'm the founder of a site called Mashable. It's a 6-year-old news site covering everything that's happening in social and digital media. Our mission is really to empower people with these tools. So we feel that by explaining what these tools are, how to use social media tools, that we can empower people to make real change in their communities. My background is I came from a rural town in Scotland, and I didn't have much access to this tech stuff, wanted to get into it, so I started writing about it. I started blogging, and it obviously allowed me to reach millions of people. We're up to about 13 million monthly readers now, and it's very much my mission to provide those tools to other people so that they might feel empowered by these social media services. So if we go down the line, we're going to be speaking about is social media sparking civil engagement? So we have Orville Schell to my right, who is the former Dean of Journalism at Berkeley and a fellow at the Asia Institute. Thanks for being with us. We have Emily Jacoby. Got the emphasis right in your name there. She is the co-founder and exec director of Digital Democracy. We have Jason Pollock, who founded Freedom Speaks. And on the end, we have a new arrival, Cory Booker, Mayor of Newark, and I see you've been using social media a great deal, so I'm really interested to hear about that.
I actually started Boom Content.
Okay. Well, what I'm going to do is give you guys about a minute each if you want to tell us a little bit, maybe starting with you, Orville, about your role in social media and civil engagement and how that's informing your thinking on this panel.
Well, I'm a long-term writer and journalist, but I've actually focused a lot on China, and maybe we can sort of talk about that in regard to social media, because in a certain sense, it is the kind of yin and yang of social media here, which we tend to think of as being very open and spontaneous and connective. But it has another interesting side, which I think we ought to reflect upon a bit in this session.
And I'm Emily Jacoby, and my background actually, I got started when I was a very young person in youth media and youth journalism. And that enabled me to see the world and use media as a chance to learn about others' experiences. I went to Cuba when I was 13. And then more than a decade later, I was in Thailand working with Burmese refugees. This was in 2007. And I was part of a research team that found a correlation amongst young Burmese refugees living in Thailand, correlation between internet access and civic engagement. And that really is what drove me and my colleague to found Digital Democracy as an organization that's focused on harnessing tools to empower the most marginalized communities to amplify their voices.
Hi, I'm Jason Pollock. I worked as Michael Moore's assistant for 3 years. I made Fahrenheit 9/11 with him. In 2006, I left to direct and write my own film. I directed a documentary called The Youngest Candidate, which is about teenagers that run for political... That's like the greatest endorsement ever. It's about teenagers that run for a political office in America, and I use it as a tool to get the youth vote out in election cycles and to educate kids in high school that they can run when they're 18 years old. In 2008, I started building an audience on Twitter because I realized very quickly I was not going to have traditional distribution or publicity. And I now have 92,000 followers on Twitter, and my page was ranked in the top 140 pages in the New York Times and PC Magazine. I help a lot of nonprofits and causes, and founded a company called Boom Content that creates films, television shows, and digital media.
Great. I'm Cory Booker. I am the mayor of a city that is just rolls off your tongue: Mumbai, Dubai, Shanghai, Newark. And I'm just pleased to be as the mayor of a city that has for a long time been disrespected, disregarded, or just plain dissed. And that the community in Newark is doing extraordinary things to stand up and show the world what is possible, and that we live in a nation and in a globe where impossible dreams can be made real in places that often people don't assume miracles can and often do happen. And I'm proud to be on a panel because social media has been a very powerful tool, which I'm looking forward to talking to you about in a very practical way to spark civic engagement, to solve real, tangible problems, and I think almost more substantively, but not often seen that way, to elevate the spirit of a community.
I have a question that was originally for Jason, but it would be great to ask it to Jason and Corey, which is really about, the critics of this space might say that it kind of might encourage some degree of what's called Slacktivism, where, you can tweet about something, or you can post a Facebook message or a photo, but is that true engagement? Is that as powerful as writing a letter to a local leader? I mean, do you think that social media encourages this form of Slacktivism?
I've seen that term a lot, obviously. I think it's a fancy term the media likes to use, or that Malcolm Gladwell might like to use sometimes. But I do think that it's not true. I think that social media is a tool for organizing. And I'm glad you asked that, because I brought some statistics that Pew recently reported about Facebook users are much more politically engaged than most people. I'm just going to read this to you real quick. The survey they conducted in November 2010, at the time, 10% of Americans reported that they attended a political rally, 23% reported that they had tried to convince someone to vote, and 66% reported that they had intended to vote. Internet users in general were over twice as likely to attend political meetings. So even if they say Slacktivism, but these people are leaving their homes and attending political meetings. 53% more likely to have voted and intended to vote. So I do think that it's kind of like it's our digital world to get involved, but many people that are involved in that space are taking it to the streets, and we see that obviously all over the world.
Corey, would you agree with that?
I would resoundingly agree. There's deep reservoirs of strength and power within our globe in the will of people to make a difference, but we often feel separated and divided from a means by which to impact, and we get caught up, I believe, in a very toxic state of sedentary agitation, where we're sitting on our couches, we're very upset about the world that we see through our TV, which is a very passive form of media, and we could yell at Fox or MSNBC. I sometimes throw my shoes at the TV, but social media is a deeper, in my opinion, richer connection to actually find ways to substantively make a difference. And I see it in very disempowered communities, and frankly, urban poor communities often are traditionally very disempowered from mechanisms by which to make a difference. And what social media has done in Newark, and obviously we're seeing it in everywhere from the Middle East to South America, but in Newark in a very tangible way, more so than the internet, frankly. These devices, and Pew has also done studies that have shown that poor minority communities, while they may not have the big desktop at home, everybody's got one of these and can now engage in ways that not before. And so I'll give you a very tangible example. I now, thanks to some of our mutual friends, an incredible woman named Sarah Ross and this other guy that most people don't really know named Ashton Kutcher, dove into the world of social media and now have a city of 300,000 people, over 1 million Twitter followers, tens of thousands of Facebook followers, and I can now engage with my residents on a fly in a population that I wouldn't see at community meetings, that I wouldn't see having high percentages of their population even voting. But now that those people from 15 to 35 engage with me on a regular basis on real substantive issues. And I have changed, in many ways, our government is beginning to change from a traditional government, even from an e-government to a sort of a we government. And just the fact that I could crowdsource thousands of people who used to scream in the darkness about something that was going on in their block now can connect with me in a substantive way. Today, this morning, I get a tweet from somebody who is upset because of a story going out that the traditional media printed as real, that a fire truck was shot in Newark, New Jersey, just like hearkening back to the riots when firefighters would go out to put out fires. A person, a resident, was able to tweet me about the information, and I knew it was not true. And just by getting the tweet before my staff got it to me before anybody else, somebody who lived in that neighborhood who otherwise would be powerless was able to alert their mayor about something. And while I was sitting in Denver, the traditional media force took down that article and apologized, basically, for fueling some of the negativity that was sitting heavy on the hearts of the people that lived in that neighborhood.
Right, so we're talking about social media as a way of kind of correcting misinformation, in a sense.
But more than that, the person, it's a powerful thing when you give somebody, and I know this from traditional organizing when I started out, when you give somebody the feeling that they did something and there was an immediate result.
Right.
So that creates a momentum. When somebody tweets me, and again, I tell my direct reports now know that I have thousands of residents that are going to empower me to hold them accountable like never before. So if somebody in a neighborhood can now tweet their mayor that there is a water main break, that there is a traffic sign that was knocked over by some careless driver, and then they can actually see the result where I tweet them back, I'm on it, and then it actually gets done. Now they're actually more connected and more engaged, and it's going to make them raise their voice even more. So, power is a wonderful thing. It's an aphrodisiac. It's addictive. Once you see that you can engage in something and make a difference, you want to do it more. You take more responsibility. What is incredibly disempowering, what is incredibly sort of toxic to the soul, is to feel like you have no ability to influence your environment and your surroundings. And now social media has given everybody platforms to make a difference in ways they couldn't, and connect to other people and sort of multiply your ability to make a difference. It's a very powerful thing.
Got it. Emily, I want to pick up on something that Corey said as the cell phone as the democratizing force. Are you seeing this elsewhere in the world? And, is it the smartphone? Is it the feature phone? What kind of devices are empowering this change?
Absolutely. The original research we did in 2007 in Thailand, it wasn't just getting online in a formal setting. It was often through their mobile phones. I did further research. I did a year and a half of research in Southeast Asia and in Southern Africa, and it's astonishing. And I'm sure many of you have seen this yourselves. It's astonishing the way in which the ubiquity of the basic phone, the basic mobile phone that can do SMS, how that enables connections that were previously impossible, and the ways in which it's changing the fields of medicine and international development, sharing of news, sharing of the price of agriculture, and so on. So in the particular case of Burma, Myanmar, where we've done quite a bit of work, the basic mobile phones were used to help coordinate protests in 2007 that were the largest in a generation. We've seen that obviously repeated in many places throughout the world. In terms of the smartphone versus what's sometimes called a dumb phone debate, I think it's a little bit silly. There's a variety of devices, and there's always going to be kind of a spectrum of who has access to them. So a lot of our work focuses on the most basic tools. How do you use basic SMS to organize a population? How do you move from just gathering information to a central hub to actually sending and receiving information and so on? In Haiti, there's some excellent work happening in the IDP camps around Port-au-Prince, where partners like the IOM, even the International Organization on Migration, have been training residents on how they can, with their basic mobile phone, send messages to Twitter and then engage in that conversation. So we're seeing the mobile phone in particular being an incredible tool.
Orville, what specific tools are you seeing empowering this revolution? Is it the phone? Is it Twitter? We hear Twitter thrown about a lot. Is it Facebook? Are there other tools that we're missing?
It's interesting. I was just looking. I mean, here we are all sitting at this table with our handheld devices like 6 guns on the table. I mean, we are just like powerless without these creatures. It's quite striking. And you were even on yours just now. In my defense, I was turning mine off. Well, I think this is a really interesting topic. I mean, and the whole idea of civic engagement, when you say those words, you think basically good things. The mayor is trying to bring Newark together, communicate with the electorate. But I think it's also important to remind ourselves that this is a pretty value-free, neutral set of technologies. And that we see a lot of terrorist websites and stuff, and terrorists can use it. In the world in which I inhabit, which is China, it's very interesting because on the one hand, this is the world that's most dynamic, exciting, flexible, in flux. On the other hand, and since the Jasmine revolutions, it has absolutely terrorized the Chinese government, like the Burmese government, because they look out and they say, there but for the grace of God. And so they recognize that there's a deep downside, and thus there's no Twitter, there's no Facebook, there's no YouTube in China. You can't access these sites or these services. And it is also interesting to remind ourselves that the Communist Party of China has really used these devices very effectively, not to oppress its people always, but actually to make communism more effective, just like the good mayor down here at the end of the table. finding out what's happening, what's going on, hear grievances, and actually remedy grievances. Also, to control what people think, to create a political climate that's favorable to their survival and longevity. So it's a curious thing. You enter this Alice in Wonderland world where the functions of it are quite different, but it's equally as dynamic, but not exactly the kinds of things that you all have been talking about. It's a highly controlled, manipulated set of tools that goes towards something other than just the sort of fluorescence of free thinking, openness, and interconnectivity between electorate and officials.
Well, let's talk about China for a second. I mean, I guess my first question there would be, having had friends who've gone to China, it would appear, and I'd love to hear if this is the case, that people are finding ways around these blockages of Twitter and social media tools. Is there a movement that's almost rebelling against that? And I guess as a follow-on to that, is it our role? We think that spreading these tools is fantastic and it's almost spreading democracy in a way. Is that our place to attempt to spread these tools around the world?
Well, our Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, certainly shares that view and views it is something of an obligation of us, of the United States, to spread these tools as fundamentally democratizing forces. This irritates many governments: Iran, Burma, Venezuela, China. North Korea doesn't really count because their web access is rather limited. I do think it is in the tradition of American sort of idealism that we do promote freedom, but of course you have to balance this off against other things in your relationship with the country. But I mean, I think if you accept, as I think most in this room would, that freedom and openness and access is a sort of a ineluctable human instinct, then this probably is on the right side of history. But on the other hand, there are countries that aren't ready for it, and they view it as on the wrong side of history because it's has a very high potential to create chaos. And look at the Middle East. All well and good to have all these fine revolutions, but just wait and see who's going to put all these pieces together again. I don't think Egypt's going to come out of this, with a Thomas Jefferson and a nice constitution.
Let's maybe talk about Egypt. And Emily, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Arab Spring. And we hear essentially that social media is given a great deal of credit. How much credit should it be given? Was this going to happen anyway?
Good question. And I actually want to respond to the other question as well, because and take a little bit of a provocative stance that might be unexpected given that the name of my organization is Digital Democracy. I don't believe it's the U.S.'s role to be exporting these tools. And in fact, I think that's highly problematic because when we just focus on the countries that we see as the enemies and we just focus on the tools that we think are best, we actually can ignore some of the inequalities that exist in our country and some of the need to do it here as well. And so I think the importance is about the values that we place on the tools and emphasizing open source, emphasizing tools that we know there's no back end, whether it's to corporations or to governments. The information is being tracked. We're all curious and we're all worried about privacy issues. And so that's a little bit of what made me want to respond to that question. In terms of the Arab Spring, I've been really had the pleasure to meet some of the young leaders from Tunisia and Egypt who were really instrumental in using social media to not only to help move the protests along, but also to report on that to the outside world. But it wasn't just social media. I mean, these are tools. These are tools that nowadays I think everybody needs to understand how they work and when to employ them and when not to. But the other thing that I think is really the not always heard story from the Arab Spring is the role of nonviolence, the role of years and years of training and organizing and so on. I think that's always key. I mean, ultimately, to have a functioning democracy, whether you're talking about at the local level or the national level, you have to have people coming together, being willing to overcome their differences and collaborate for the common good. So using these tools in ways in which can help that, I think, is the key to always be searching for.
So would this have happened without social media and with the tools that we have?
Eventually, yes, but I don't think we ever would have seen so many countries happening so quickly. I mean, the time that Tunisia took, the early protests happened beginning in December. It took till mid-January. Egypt was a much more heightened of when they actually got Mubarak to resign. But the longer-term process, as Orville points out, of the longer-term process of actually developing a functioning participatory government takes a lot longer. But I would say that we never would have seen things happening so quickly if it weren't for the tools.
I'm interested in a point about whether it is our role to spread these tools. I'd be interested in hearing from the audience who would agree that it's our role to spread these social media tools as a democratizing force. Any hand raises? So I'm going to guess everyone is going to raise their hands when I say it's not our role. No, I'm saying it's our role. Okay.
We have to make money.
Can I just fire back?
Go for
on
it.
Something? So, the most valued god in Hinduism arguably is Shiva, the god of destruction, because you can't have great birth or emergence without destroying the old. And Orwell, I think, was making great points that that there is no necessarily a Thomas Jefferson that's going to emerge. But I just remind you, our democracy was not made when Thomas Jefferson came about. In fact, our democracy was a horribly savage, unequal, unfair place with literally the support of domestic terrorism that continued well into the first century of our existence with African Americans, Native Americans, and brutal savagery and denial of women's rights in ways that we are now condemning other countries for doing. So Thomas Jefferson, I applaud him, but he's not some kind of spiritual figure that landed in this democracy and made it real. We had to go through years and years of evolution. So I'm thrilled at what's happening in the Middle East. It's not an easy road to democracy. It's going to be messy. It's going to be ugly. There'll be savage realities. There'll be painful setbacks, just like in the United States of America, that it really wasn't until the 20th century that we started seeing the birth of a democracy that we all could be proud of, without child labor, I can go through the ugliness of the American democracy. To the point where literally the year I was born, my parents had to get a white couple to pose as them just to buy a house in a neighborhood that had a school that could provide for their kids an education. So as much as we want to celebrate the myth of the great American democracy, the reality is most countries are going to have to go through the same ugly evolution that we have. But bravo, I had a chance, I was on the Time 100 list of the most influential people in the world, which was ridiculous because I think Kim Kardashian was on that same list. But there was a guy worthy of that, and one of the great soldiers in the Egyptian peaceful revolution. And he said something that resonated with my core, which he said that no matter what, the power of the people will always emerge as greater than the people in power. And what I know power may manifest through the very hallmark of our democracy, which is e pluribus unum, when people find their connections to each other. King in a jail cell in Birmingham, when our democracy was wounded and when white supremacy was the law of the land, said that we are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality tied in a common garment of destiny. What this is doing in Newark, New Jersey, in Egypt, in South America, is making real that spiritual network that Martin Luther King spoke so eloquently about, and allowing it is a neutral platform. I really love what you said that, just like television is. You see the profound to the profane every day on TV, sometimes in the same network. Sometimes mostly profane. But there's something incredibly spiritually affirming, empowering, transforming when you can connect people on a righteous cause. And it makes me believe, to finally end with another King quote, is that the arc of the universe is long, but it does bend towards justice, because we as humans, as much as we are physically, geographically, racially, religiously isolated from each other, we are finding deeper and deeper, more substantive ways to connect and see the oneness in our common cause.
If I could just try. Biz and Ev were here, and they spoke about China a little bit. I just wanted to share what they said. They said even though it's unplugged, they still see traffic from China all the time, every day. They have tons of traffic from China, and I think that goes to the fact that the internet is a very democratizing force, and there are people out there that are there's always someone out there that's smarter than you at it, and there's always as much as the government wants to stop things, there's always going to be a way for people to figure out a way around it to use this tool. And I think, in America, where we have the freedom of the press, we take these tools for granted in many ways, because in another country, social media is freedom to these people. We don't really see that here because we have freedom of the press. We have people ranting and raving about whatever they want, whenever they want. But in places like Egypt and Tunisia and China, obviously, where that is not the case at all, and the government has total control over what people hear and see. Finally, now there's this platform where citizens are able to use it to unite. So I think we definitely take it for granted in some ways in America because we have these freedoms that many people do not have around the world.
Emily, I feel like you're ready to jump in there. I mean, I guess a good follow-on question from what Corey was saying is are these tools a kind of a force of or a source of tolerance? The more we know about people, the more we feel connected to them.
I think they can be. I think they can also be the opposite. I mean, famous examples, radio was used to spur hate that spurred the Rwandan genocide. I think it's always about how we use them. Humans are, by definition, animals that use tools, that use tools to help us communicate, and so on. Language is a tool. And so as we've evolved, so too have our tools. And I think a lot of what the whole social media track of the Aspen Ideas Festival is trying to make sense of, okay, what do these tools mean that we're clearly using, but we don't really know yet all about it. A lot of our work does focus on empowering marginalized groups to choose the tools that are right for them, whether it's to portray the human rights abuses that are happening in Burma, whether it's to document the situation of rape happening in the camps in Haiti, all sorts of different scenarios where we're working with groups to help them use the tools so that they can share the messages they want. Photography is a tool that we actually use a lot. It maybe doesn't quite count as social media unless it's through Flickr or something else, but that's a tool that we find to often be very humanizing, but it can also be dehumanizing. So I think it's always about how you use it rather than the tool itself being the magic bullet.
Orville, I feel like we're almost, that was a great summary of where we're going with this conversation. I think we're almost at an answer as to, is social media sparking civil engagement? I think what we're hearing from Emily is, in a way, no, because it's humans who are creating this civil engagement, and these tools happen to exist, and they're somewhat neutral, and it's how we use them, and they can be used for good, and they can be used for bad. Orville, what would be your thoughts on kind of the overarching theme of, is it social media that's empowering this, or is it just people?
Well, I do think we are seeing in several countries and societies the sort of social media experiment is something of a petri dish in terms of whether it can be controlled to certain kinds of uses, or whether it just will spill out and it can't be contained in any proper way. And I think, again, I would say, in the Middle East, there are a number of countries much less effectively. Iran is certainly trying to control it. But China, I would say, is the Bell Labs of social media, internet control, to see if it can be brought to heel in a way that comports with a one-party system, and to neutralize the very things that you all are talking about. And I have to say, even though there's a lot of yeastiness on the social media and the internet in China, they've done a pretty good job. Hats off. In the sense, if that's your cup of tea, I think they've surprised me with their ability to ride this tiger.
50-cent party.
They may come a cropper. It all depends on kind of whether you really do believe that history is heading in the direction of, inescapably in the direction of greater openness, or whether maybe the Chinese have sort of opened some new door to some new kind of model where a lot of the verities that we take as given are going to be turned around somehow. And that's why it's such an interesting experiment to stay tuned on and watch.
But don't you think they're blocking it out of fear because they know what will happen?
Yeah, of course, but the question is, can you block it ultimately? Can this sort of wild animal be brought to be tamed to the purposes that aren't very democratic, that aren't very sort of multipolar and diverse?
I just want to switch gears really quickly because I know we're a little short on time, and I'd love to ask Corey, one of the criticisms sometimes of social media is how measurable or not it might be. I mean, what are the metrics of success? How do we say, yes, this is sparking civil engagement? Are there numbers we look at? Is it anecdotal? What are those metrics?
So, I live in a world where, metrics are critical in everything that we do. We have social media metrics that we're using to show that this is a medium that's really great. How many people are using social media to reach out for help from government, whether it's fixing a pothole or inquiry about what to do for this summer for my kids. And those numbers are going up in a dramatic fashion.
Do you have specific tools that you use? Are you sitting there on Hootsuite and checking
who's tweeting who? No, we are, well, first of all, some of the platforms, Facebook is very good at providing built-in metrics that we could use to sort of measure what we're doing. We can measure how much our messages are getting out, as well as have some idea of measurements of what's coming in. But this is a new world, and I think that government of the future is going to find even more productive ways, not only to measure their impact, but to use it to do their work. And right now, for example, there's governments that have reams of data that they're not really using in an optimal way. And to be able to partner with social entrepreneurs to use that data in a way that empowers individual citizens, this is where you have breakthroughs. So I sat down with some extraordinary gentlemen who are sort of coaches of mine who were just showing me how when you have, and Rahm Emanuel's doing it now, Bloomberg really is a pioneer in it, where he said, I'm going to just give these data and hold competitions for people to see what they can do with this data. And so now, for me, if I'm concerned about the health of my family, I can now go to stores and use the city's data, partnering with a great application to sit in any restaurant and ask, well, what's the health history of this restaurant, and really know. And that's just a small example of how government and the functions that I'm in charge of are going to become a lot more easy, a lot more empowering by partnering with people that are going to build social media platforms to advance larger causes of the community. So I think we're in the midst of a social media revolution in government. And you see, again, in the profane ways, I think you see every politician rushing to get a Twitter account. You might have had some people rushing to get rid of their Twitter accounts, but I think the move is going to be that you're going to see more and more government agents trying to get on social media platforms, but more importantly, the innovators in the social media are doing things every single day that are helping. And so my team is jumping on everything from Foursquare to looking at Quora and a lot of these new companies that we think are going to begin to change the way we relate with government. And hopefully with what Rahm Emanuel's doing, with what Bloomberg's doing, what we hope to be doing, we're going to see government 5 years from now very different, and civic engagement very different than we're even experiencing it right now.
Okay, I know we're getting close on time, so Jason, I'd love if you have any concluding thoughts on the overall theme.
In 1997, Time Life magazine said that Johannes Gutenberg's printing press was the most important invention of the last 1,000 years. And I think that that's very important to remember. The reason that they gave it to the printing press over the car or the computer or anything else was because the printing press was a democratizing force around the world. It changed the church, it changed governments, it changed revolutions. And the reason it did that was because it allowed people to have ideas. Thomas Jefferson said that information is the currency of a democracy. And I truly believe that we're in the middle of another revolution right now. Maybe Mark Zuckerberg and the Twitter guys are going to be our next Johannes Gutenberg in many ways, because that is exactly what it's doing, and we're seeing it in real time. A lot of my clients are always asking me, what's the ROI of social media? I say, well, open your eyes and read a newspaper. I mean, it's like, I feel like that debate is over at this point. And if you're still wondering, get on these networks and figure it out. I mean, I made a documentary that did not have traditional distribution or publicity. All of that came because I got on Twitter. I got a job with Ashton Kutcher because I got on Twitter. I met Mayor Booker because of Twitter. So I think that in many ways like that question is kind of over, and I try to help people see that every day. So thank you.
Emily Zuckerberg as Gutenberg.
Well, there is a point in the Social Network, that the film, where I think the twins say something about the number of people that it's going to reach, and the fact that Zuckerberg did see that it could go so much further than that is I think a sign of a visionary. Not that Facebook is actually what I usually recommend to the human rights activists that we work with. I usually recommend that they don't use it, but I think something that Mayor Booker said.
Is it identity? Is it because
because it's what a great way to infiltrate. I mean, if you are an activist in a country like Burma or a country like Egypt where there's a sophisticated intelligence service, the best way to infiltrate is through Facebook network, because everybody thinks it's closed. So a lot of the activists that we work with think that it's closed. You only invite your friends. Well, a friend of the friend can often see the network, and a friend of friend, you can fake identities, etc. So not that I say people absolutely shouldn't, but for instance, it's about if we're working with activists who live in Thailand but who go inside Burma to do human rights reports, that they should never put their own picture up there and that sort of thing. Because just being friends with somebody who's in an Aung San Suu Kyi group could get you arrested, could get you thrown into jail for 60 years. But something what I want to close with is actually the reason that I do this is because at a young age, I learned that if you take action, you can sometimes make a difference. It's not always easy. Sometimes it takes a long time. I was a student protester during in the lead up to the Iraq War, and that was a really, really depressing time, because no matter what we were doing, no matter how much we thought it was the wrong decision, we couldn't change the situation. And I think that's what leads to apathy. And there's always, in every generation, there seems to be this idea that the younger generation is apathetic and doesn't care. And I don't think that's the case. I think that people are apathetic when they feel like they can't make a difference. And so I really wholeheartedly agree with some of the examples that have been shared in terms of when people can take a small action and feel like they can make a difference, they'll go further and further. And we see that happening all over the world. So, what we've been most excited about is that it's not only in communities that have more connection, certainly like rooms like Aspen Institute, but even in refugee camps, in rural villages, in IDP camps, and so on, people are using these tools to actually impact their lives and make a difference.
Orville, I'll give you the final word. I mean, I was really interested in, I would love to dig down, if we could, really briefly on the issue of identity, but also your thoughts around the entire theme. Is this sparking civil engagement? But also, to Emily's point, is identity a good thing or a bad thing in this space? Is anonymity actually quite important?
Well, certainly anonymity is a close kindred spirit of privacy. And we do risk losing some of that. I mean, I think this is an amazing time we're living through. It's such a sea change. I would just say that despite the immense potential of all of these tools, we shouldn't forget that sort of underneath it all, some of the old and more concrete institutions such as schools, media, library, you could go on, even something like a family where you have sort of concrete interaction. I mean, all of that is really important. I mean, that is the great muscle and sinew of a society. And if we think that social media is going to replace that in major measure, I think we're wrong, which doesn't mean that social media can't be an incredible asset.
On that note, I'd like to thank all of our panelists. If we give them a round of applause. I thought that was fascinating, and I think we could have spoken for much longer about that. We have time briefly to switch over to questions from the audience. If anyone has a question, yep.
What do you think of online political parties that will take over from the existing politicians, and when do you think it will happen?
If I can just repeat the question for the camera. You were asking about what do you think of online political parties?
Online political parties, which will overcome the existing political structure.
Which will overcome existing political structure.
The party will be just members online without the bureaucracies, without the conventions.
So do we see the potential for online political parties, essentially?
Okay. And if and when do you think it will happen?
I think that would be a great one for Corey, but whoever wants to step in.
I've done a lot of work with MoveOn.org. They have 6 million people on their mailing list and are massively powerful in America. I think it depends on what the group wants to do with it. But as big as they are, President Obama has a way bigger network than they do, and I think that if politicians use these tools correctly, then that idea of a rogue online party taking over is probably not going to happen, because the politicians are going to have the platform. If President Obama is using these tools correctly, obviously he's going to be able to create more engagement than potentially the Tea Party or something.
I hope so in a weird way. I really hope what you're saying portends of the future, because I'm very concerned that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are the problem in America, and that we've allowed parties to grow bigger than ideas, and people are partisan before they listen to each other. No side has a monopoly on great ideas. And when we have social media platforms that are organizing around ideas first, not individuals, not personalities, not parties, but organizing around powerful ideas, that's when I think that this nation, which is so mired in this divisive partisan culture, is going to start having real breakthroughs. Because I know from my just experience, you could pick controversial issues. Actually, most Americans agree on the idea so much more, but we have such a reflexive reaction to parties. And so what gives me hope is that social media platforms, Facebook pages that are organizing around issues and ideas, and less people, politics, and parties is going to be the big breakthrough. And so I really hope what you're saying is right.
He's got over 1 million followers on Twitter.
Yeah.
Hi. Greetings from New Jersey.
Yay, Jersey girl.
Thank you, Mayor Booker. We're all very inspired by you in New Jersey. And I just wanted to, I guess I had a question for you and anyone else. My husband ran for political office in Jersey City. And, the reality was that unless we were outside supermarkets, unless we were at, old age homes, unless we were walking the street, he wouldn't have had the margins he had. It was unsuccessful. And so I think, to your point, if I would have just tweeted that we were having a meeting, I would have had 3 people. And so there was so much to say about actually walking the streets, knocking on doors. So I'd like to know how you reconcile that and how you are bringing, are we just feeling that the kind of old school tools are going to be rendered obsolete, and that once...
Well, I think Orville's comment, do I need to repeat a question for you?
Real quick.
So she's basically asking that if she had just tweeted about organizing a political dissident movement in Jersey City, which might need some dissident movements in my opinion, that she wouldn't have gotten that much of a following. Isn't there still a role for the traditional face-to-face ways of organizing? And I think it really spoke to, Orville's profound, the right comment to end on, is I always say to my teams is that there's a toolbox, and social media is not going to ever replace the old the toolbox. And I love what Orville said. Look, there's one of my great friends is a guy named Omar Wasow, who created a website that probably only a few of you have visited in this room, called blackplanet.com, which is the stickiest website in America for African Americans and really hip white people like my friend here. And so he has this. He used to always get invited to speak at talking about the digital divide, and he took a powerfully contrarian view of this. He's like, I'm not concerned about the digital divide. I'm concerned that my schools are not producing kids that can read in America. That you take a high school, 2,000 of our high schools in America were put on a dropout factory list 2 years ago. If you look at these high schools 2 years later, and I talked recently about Thurgood Marshall, this profound name high school in San Francisco, where only 10 of the kids who are graduating out of 600 is college ready. And we all know about this problem. Now, those 10 kids are going to be able to access the digital world. They're going to be able to metabolize ideas. But those other kids who have 4th grade reading levels and 3rd grade, you give them all the tools and access you can, and they're not going to be able to engage in a way. So ultimately, I think Orville's comment was 100% correct. These traditional means of doing things must still be the very skeletal framework for how we're going about developing a strong democratic society. I just think in the same way that our technologies have supercharged our abilities is what social media can do. But if we don't get the core of our democracies right, this great democracy that I believe in and have faith in and love will begin to decline rapidly within the global context.
I think it's also how you connect the two. Using the social web and connecting with on the ground activities. A great example of that is Pepsi Refresh Project, which I helped with Catalyst on. And when you were looking at who was winning the Pepsi Refresh projects, it wasn't groups with big online followings. It was groups with big on the ground followings. And they were using the social web, but they were rallying schools and people in cafeterias and gymnasiums, and that's how they were winning that contest. So I think it's just how you kind of bridge the gap and connect the two to create a really great strategy.
I think if we're phenomenally quick, we might squeeze in one more and try not to hold up the next panel. Guy in the green shirt.
I'm glad you brought up Pepsi because with other forms of media, we've seen commercial interests appropriate them and use them in some ways in a more sophisticated fashion than so-called people on the street. And I'm wondering, we haven't mentioned that yet, but is there any way that commercial interests would appropriate the social media? Can they appropriate it? Can they use it in a way that would do like TV has done?
With specific regard to civil engagement?
Well, yeah. In other words, they would colonize the minds of people in a way that civic engagement wouldn't be the first thing that they think of. I guess that, so it's not a direct confrontation, but it's a very subtle Gramscian kind of a thing.
I've got a couple of thoughts on that. Yeah, so the question was, how is are corporate interests appropriating in any sort of ways social media and that's a short version. Shortcutting social media. So a couple examples. For one, if you log onto Foursquare here in Aspen, most of the deals are for chains, like national chain restaurants or other like companies that exist all over throughout the country, and I think must have deals that they have in every location. So it doesn't seem like it's a very homegrown movement here, which is fine. It doesn't need to be. Foursquare doesn't need to be the tool that probably people in Aspen need to get to talk with one another. And I just read an article. It was a blog post. I don't remember the source, but it was all about student activism and whether student activism is dead or not. And it claimed that no, the new form of student activism is consumer activism. And I have students that are buying Tom's shoes, so therefore students are totally active. And well, quite frankly, I think that's bullshit. Tom's shoes, we can argue,
That's a technical term.
It's a technical term. Tom's shoes, we can debate whether they're good or not, whether they're actually hurting local economies because you're giving away shoes rather than supporting local shoemakers, or whether it's extremely helpful and it's great that people are buying them. I don't necessarily want to take a side on that, but I don't think that alone, I don't think consumer activism alone can ever be enough. So I do see corporations, I think, really trying to use these tools, and for the most part, I applaud that. I don't think it's a bad thing, but I think we do have to be vigilant and recognize that alone is not civic engagement.
And I'm sorry, I had to be the hopeful one because I think Orville might jump in here because he has some strong feelings on this. But look, I think corporate interests will always be there, and they'll thrive more where there's a disengaged citizenry. And so the more engaged the citizenry, the more you have an equal challenge. I remember my early readings of guys like Saul Alinsky will tell you organized money is so powerful, but organized people will always be more powerful. And so the thing that I love about social media, especially what I see on Twitter, is authenticity rules the day. And as soon as somebody sounds like they're inauthentic, like I think it was 50 Cent that was sneaking in ads, being paid, he quickly lost authenticity and sunk in esteem within the world of social media. And I see it in politicians. So politicians who just robotically use their social media platforms to tell people, I will be appearing here, they don't get great followings. But people who tweet with their heart and their passion and have the courage to expose their truth, those are the people that often get great following. So I think what social media is doing, in my opinion, is while there will always be powerful perversions out there and I don't want to say all corporate interests are perversions, but there will always be powerful influences. But what social media does is it awakens individual citizens, which creates, I think, a very balanced challenge to those corporate interests that you express some concern about.
I'm getting told that we've got a bit more time, so we can take some more questions. Yes, at the back.
First of all, Mr. Mayor, would you consider moving to Toronto or leaving?
I think there's a law.
think this was to you, Corey.
I mean, I have very strong feelings on that, and they're not all related to social media. Look, I think that the cynicism of the public is born from the hypocrisy of our politics. And we have a really broken political system. And I know there's going to be some panels on this. But let me give you one issue and then try to tie it back to social media, where most Americans agree. But yet we always try to convince ourselves. You pick an issue in America, and I can think of controversial ones where I can show you empirically that we agree more than we disagree. So let's take a really controversial one. I'm out west, I know I am. And we have a very different view on guns probably out here than in New Jersey. But let's take guns, for example. Immediately a polarizing issue. And we think we all disagree. But when the Heller decision came down and overturned the handgun ban in Washington, D.C., people on my side of the aisle immediately like, oh my gosh, people are going to be shooting each other. It's terrible, it's terrible. And I was mayor of Newark, New Jersey, where we can buy guns. We don't have a handgun ban. And I decided to look at all the shootings in my city. And tragically, we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. We all know in this room we have a Virginia Tech every day, 34 people murdered in America every day. So I had a lot of data to look at. I found one shooting in my city, hundreds if not thousands of shooting that was done by somebody who had a legally obtained handgun. And that was a woman who shot her boyfriend, who probably deserved it, frankly. So here's my party talking about issues that don't matter and not going to help me stop violence. Then you take the other side of the political aisle, who the pry my gun out of my cold dead hand political arguments, and their arguments aren't right on. In fact, so we did something. I say we. A group called Mayors Against Illegal Guns, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, funded by a guy named Michael Bloomberg, who gave me my best political advice ever. First become a billionaire, Corey, then become mayor. And we polled gun owners in America, and between 75, depending on the issue, to 90% of American gun owners believe certain laws should be changed. The big one now, some of you might have seen about, is the fact that I could have a temporary restraining order out against me for threatening to kill my significant other. I could be on the terrorist watch list where I literally can't get on a plane, but I can go and do a gun show and buy guns right now, which is the main source. The plurality of weapons shooting people on my streets are coming from these gun shows and these loopholes. So here's a case where the majority of Americans agree, but our politics are not serving the public interest. And so my point is, this is what frustrates all of us when we sit down and listen to these hollow debates about our political system, when we realize that we're not about solving problems, we're often about defining each other or what we're against. And so my hope for social media, and this is where I want to tie it back, is that I think we are in a new era where most of us Americans are really frustrated. We're really turned off by our politics as a whole. We really have grown cynical about the ability of government to solve very complex problems. And so what I'm hoping is, and I've had very constructive conversations with peers of mine, is that we're going to start seeing a new way of organizing American sentiment, as I said to the gentleman earlier, around ideas and not around political parties, and that political parties will begin to lose their power and realize that they're either going to die or they're going to have to start moving to where the majority of us Americans are. That's my hope.
Go ahead.
If I could just add a quick thought, and perhaps to your question about democracy, I do believe that the presumption of American democracy has always been that through education in the media, you have people who will expose something. It'll come up through the media. Maybe it'll go to a court case. Maybe it'll go to legislation, and then it'll get remedied. I think these links are broken. And the two most primary links of all in this absolutely essential chain, which is the fundamental machine by which democracy operates, is education and the media. And both are in a state of precipitous decline, I would even say collapse. And I think unless we can get a handle on those two things, there's not a whole lot that people are going to tweet about. Facebook is going to be a wasteland of meaningless stuff. I mean, you really need to water the roots of this tree, and by God, we're not doing it.
Yep. There's no mic.
Thank you. So what they told me was this, that the people that first came out on January 25th mostly did not have a Facebook account, that they had done tons and tons of work ahead of time, going door to door in poor neighborhoods, engaging people, explaining what was going on, and getting them to commit to come out on January 25th. January 25th is, in Egypt, Police Day, where we honor the police. So they wanted to have this demonstration on Police Day only to annoy the police because they'd have to come out on their day off. And it was in protest of police brutality. So the perfect thing was, let's just protest for this one day, protest police brutality, and we'll annoy the police because they'll have to come out to, break the demonstrations. It's not going to be a sit-in. They were certainly not going to be asking for Mubarak to step down. What changed everything is that these people who had come out from these poor neighborhoods, did not have a Facebook, said, we're not leaving, we're staying in Tahrir, and we're going to ask for Mubarak to step down. It was these people who didn't know anything about activism, didn't know that it was too crazy, a demand, that weren't politicized. They were the ones that actually, and this is from the cyber activists, these are the people telling me this, they were the ones that actually transformed everything from a simple sort of Facebook party, which they've had many of before, didn't amount to anything, to something that was very real. Now, we do research on public opinion, and what we found is that only 17% of people who protested in Egypt had internet access. So why I'm sharing all of this is just to, offer all of us this picture of the importance, and I never take away the importance of social media and its role in these revolutions, but these were really revolutions of the people. And they span the entire spectrum of the Egyptian people, the Tunisian people. These were not the elite, these were not the digitized, these were really revolutions of the people rising up.
I was just interested quickly, Emily, do you have any input with regard to, I was just catching that stat, 17% of people who protest in Egypt had internet access,
Only
so the vast
17%
majority.
of the whole population.
Right.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the case I cited earlier of Burma 2007, they organized those protests despite less than 1% internet and mobile phone penetration, but it was about the key people having it and being able to coordinate. And the only thing I would disagree with your assessment, which I think was so wonderful and really helpful, is that I wouldn't say that their previous protests and the previous movements that they organized on Facebook didn't amount to anything. I think that each time they learned key lessons that enabled them to make this one successful. And that's part of it. It's the long view of things. It's the recognition that, the first time you go out to organize a protest, maybe a lot of people will come, but generally it takes a lot of time. And I guess to tie that back into the earlier question from Don about kind of democracy and where does democracy fit into this, I actually hope that our democracies get smaller and they get more local, and that's really where democracy can happen is on the local level, where we're all where we're in a community, where we know that community. But I think for me, one of the major values of social media is the sharing of the lessons learned from one community to another. And the Egyptians absolutely say that they were inspired by the Tunisians, just as the Tunisians say that they were inspired by the Egyptians before them, even when they weren't yet successful. And we see that repeating itself and repeating itself. And I think that's part of the value of the human spirit, is when you see the human spirit being able to conquer these often really difficult situations, it inspires you to say, I can do the same, and my community can do the same.
Question in the back.
Hi, I'm Bonenbaugh. I actually run digital globally for PepsiCo, so I figured as the corporate interest that was being mentioned, I might as well say something. And the Refresh Project, having gone around and met with winners and stuff, I mean, we would go into towns and people who are, if you won, you would come up and hug us. But even if you were, and I'm sure there's a lot of marketers that have never had the chance to be hugged as a result of the campaigns that they've worked with. So I felt very blessed to be able to be a part of bringing that to life. But what I thought was even more profound than I think the program and the impact it's had is the impact that it's had on us as a global organization. So what it meant was that here we're taking our flagship and we are putting social media at the center of this activation program. It meant that everybody from the CEO down had to focus and understand what social media was, and it's transformed the organization. And so my question is do we think that social is actually transforming the institutions which are governing our democracy? And when you look, I mean, President Obama is the first president that's actually had a BlackBerry. I've had a BlackBerry for almost a decade. And here, the leader of the free world is just now able to send an email, wirelessly. It's kind of crazy. So, but have you guys seen, or are you seeing the same kind of transformations that we're experiencing as an org?
I mean, I think that DC is definitely behind the entertainment and brand world. I think a lot of it comes from fear, because everyone in DC is so afraid to say or do anything for what the repercussions might be. I'm constantly trying to convince nonprofits and organizations and politicians to do more with it. But then again, like when something like Anthony Weiner happens, I think there was a stat that came out the next day that said 30% of Congress was tweeting less now because of it. So I think a lot of it is driven just by fear of like what might the repercussions be.
Because God forbid our pictures of ourselves get flipped out like that. Look, government is slow to follow every other sector of society. You look at government, schools. We're still operating our schools on an agrarian age, and the rest of the sectors of our society. So government is a follower often. There are government innovators all around. But I'm telling you, the fact that I talk to my friends in the entertainment business, whether it's a friend of mine who's head of a large cable network who said they now invest significant amounts of their advertising in the social media space, where friends of mine in the movie industries talk about that Twitter could kill a movie in its opening weekend when it used to take word of mouth a whole week before people realized I'm a tomato and they'd already made their money back. So it is a revolution that is happening, and so it's going to continue to change, and government will be catching up like we always do, going late. But I know at a time when I have incredibly tight margins, where I laid off 20% of my workforce, I've got to find ways. There's an urgency for me to find ways of efficiencies, crowdsourcing talent and the skill of my city in ways that I never did before. So I agree that the majority of my residents are not on social media. I spent 4 hours walking streets yesterday with my coordinator of homeless issues, with my reentry issues, because that's the way you ultimately have to continue to do, beat the street. But I also know that a lot of the way I'm governing is being empowered by the ability to sit and text. Now, I can now, in a way that never before, because politics is a lot about communications, in a way that never before, I can tweet right now to more people in my state. I have over 1 million followers, a significant amount of them are in my state, than read the print version of my daily newspaper. I could take on traditional media in ways that no politician could 3 years ago. When Conan O'Brien stood up and said, we did an innovative healthcare program in Newark, and he said, Cory Booker in Newark, New Jersey, they have a new innovative healthcare program. I think the best healthcare program for Newark, New Jersey would be a bus ticket out of town. Now, you're allowed to laugh at that. It's actually funny. People thought I was mad. I do have security with me. I'm taking the names of people who laughed. You will not be able to fly into Newark from now on. But so what we decided to do, with the help of some people like the gentleman next to me, is we said, you know what? Conan's got 2.5 million viewers. I got 1 million Twitter followers. We're going to take him on in a way that before we just didn't have the tools. All you could do was write an angry letter. And before you knew it, my feud with Conan, because I did put him on the no-fly list in Newark, and then he banned me from Birmingham Airport, which is not that big of a problem for me, to Burbank. But it became a story, the number one, and maybe this is the trivialization that I think that Orville was rightfully talking about, but it became the number one downloaded story on CNN's website. Forget his 2.5 and my 1 million followers. Now we had in a way that I could not do in the past. And so what lots of government officials talk to me about is the fact that how can we learn to use this tool in a way that's going to accentuate our larger goals for our government institution. And that's why I think that politicians are going to start running for these tools, because they're so powerful in the face of it. And ultimately, I think they can never replace the kind of work we were talking about earlier, but it's going to help us do our jobs better.
I think we're actually at time there, so on that note, I'd like to thank our panelists and thank all of you for your own civil engagement. Thanks. That was Great.